Welcome to session 8 in our Joshua study. This is Leaving a Legacy. The other day I called my daughter-in-law, Rochelle. We have a wonderful relationship, and she is the mother of our 2 grandchildren, Jonathan, who is 6, and Hope, who is 3. And they were doing a Mother's Day project and making me cards and talking about Grandma. And she asked the kids, what is it that stands out to you the most about Grandma? And she thought they would probably say, oh, she loves birds, or she loves teaching us science, or she likes to sing. But Jonathan looked up at his mom and said, she loves Jesus. When I heard this story, it just made my heart go, because my grandson got it. He saw in me what I wanted him to see. I wanted him to see that I loved Jesus. We need to be sure that we pass along the legacy of our faith to our children and grandchildren, as we're going to talk about in this lesson a little bit as we study Joshua's final commission to the next generation. Now, in our life, though, as we go back to Joshua, as we conclude it, we've had some major campaigns. And remember, in the last session, we had that big battle of the 5 Amorite kings, and then the conquering of the Southland, and a big campaign of conquering the Northland, which took totally about 7 years. In our life, we've had some big battles, like the one where we had consistent victories when we were in Uganda. And in fact, in the second trip, we had some amazing victories as well. And our son, who is now a pastor, went as the prayer coordinator, and we saw even more amazing fruit on the second trip. But we had some major campaigns as a family as well, long periods of years with battle after battle. Our children were with us as we fought these battles, the battles that God wanted us to fight. And we had our valleys, our high mountaintop experience, and we grew as a family. But it was now time for our boys to go out on their own, to have their own campaigns, their own victories in the promised land that God was calling them to. They had both some amazing victories and stories as well. So for the Southern campaign, I'm going to tell you about Rob. He was called into the ministry at a young age. He actually went both, like I said, on both Uganda trips, and he was the prayer coordinator, had many healings there. But back to his young age, as he was growing up, he had a calling of camp ministry on his heart. And even as a young man, when he was in the summer between 9th and 10th grade, and in 9th grade, he had played football and played varsity as a 9th grader. He was an excellent football player, later went on to walk on for the Ducks. He gave up football his 10th grade year so that he could go to camp for the summer and serve there as a volunteer on the SWAT team. I think this is an amazing testimony to where his priorities were, even at that time in his life. And as his battles continued to go, he worked in camp ministries for the next years, worked as a music leader, was in Youth Alive at the school, and fought his own campaigns and battles. And then as he moved into his adult life, he continued to pursue God with his whole heart. He moved on as the men's dean, finally, of the camp at Camp Harlow. He was a school teacher, a football coach, a youth pastor, and then finally now, he's the director of student ministries at Canvas Church in Kalispell, Montana, supervising 50 student interns who are going to be going into the ministry. So he had his own Southern campaign, and in the meantime, Jonathan was waging the Northern campaign. Jonathan, as well as a young man, as you know, as I told you from his Jordan River experience, was an evangelist, and he loved everything about evangelism, Billy Graham. And his hero, of course, was Reinhard Bonnke. Went to Nigeria with Reinhard Bonnke and was a prayer partner there, one of the prayer altar people at the big crusade there in Nigeria, and also took his own mission trip into Uganda. Well, all of these trips and all of the work he does as a youth leader, as in camp ministry, led him to his calling, and that was to become an ophthalmologist or an eye surgeon, an eye doctor, because he feels the calling on his life is to go to overseas ministries, to overseas mission trips, and restore sight to the blind. So he's had an amazing journey as well, as God has taken him from a CPA into medical school, and then finally as an ophthalmology resident currently in South Carolina. He has 2 more years to go until he completes his dream and will be able to start doing those mission trips. Both of these were major campaigns, and their dad and I watched and entered into their battles through prayer as they fought these battles along the way to take their inheritance, their lot in the promised land that God had promised them. He had marked out territory for them to take in his kingdom. Well, let's get back to Joshua. The northern and southern campaigns are over, and it's time to divide the lands. All of the lands were essentially conquered, the major cities in the portions they were supposed to conquer, but not the small villages, and there was still a lot of people and a lot of territories that hadn't been completely cleared out yet. But the idea was that they learned from Joshua as they did it together how to do it, how to listen, how to follow God's strategy exactly, how to follow him with their whole heart, how to be strong and courageous and go take the things that were promised to them, kill those giants. The idea was now this same charge was to be passed to the tribal leaders to do the same things in their lands that were given to them by allotment. So some of the tribes did a really good job at going in and conquering the last vestiges of their promised land allotment. Caleb took Hebron and took the giants out at Hebron, and this was the portion he was allotted. You can read about that in this portion of scripture at the end of Joshua as well. The tribe of Dan didn't do so well. They never really even took the territory they were supposed to take. So there are varying levels of success as the leadership was turned over to the individual tribes. And I want you to get a picture of how these tribal allotments fell out, because they did apportion the land by lot. So I'm going to put up a map here and you can take a look at what's going on here. On the east side of the Jordan, you can see we have the tribes of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. Remember, I've talked about them before. They arranged that with Moses, and they were able to go over and help fight to take the land on the west side of the Jordan. They sent 40,000 of their choice warriors over, but they actually had, according to the book of Numbers, about 135,000 fighting men. So they did leave some on the east side of the Jordan to guard the women and the children and the territory they had, while their brethren were going over to help fight. So after 7 years, they were then allowed to go home, as I'm going to talk about later. In the northern section, we have, on the west side of the Jordan, we have Asher, Naphtali, you can see them up there, Zebulun, and Issachar. Then south of them, we have the other half tribe of Manasseh, who Manasseh, actually, remember, was one of the 2 sons of Joseph. Joseph's sons got a double portion because he was the firstborn, and that is who Jacob gave the inheritance to. And then Ephraim, south of him, which is actually the tribe that Joshua was from. And this area tended to be the hot spot. This is where a lot of the biblical activity takes place. And then we have Benjamin below him, and then the large portion for the tribe of Judah, because it was the largest tribe. And you can see Judah contains Jerusalem, Hebron, and some of the other biblical stories, some of the hot spots as well. And then Simeon is this circle that was given an inheritance within the tribe of Judah. There are also, you notice, there wasn't anything for the tribe of Levi. Now, there were actually, if you really count, 13 tribes, since Joseph's 2 sons got their own tribe. So the tribe of Levi and Simeon were prophesied as being scattered among Israel. Well, so Simeon was given this portion, this allotment within Judah, and eventually they were scattered. They didn't stay as a unit very long. But the tribe of Levi was given not an inheritance per se the same way, because God said he was their inheritance. And remember, they were the tribe that was to take care of the temple. They had the priests as part of the Levites, and they also were expected to be the teachers of the law. So what happened with them is they got scattered cities throughout all of the promised land, 48 cities that were apportioned to them, to the tribe of Levi, and they got those cities and the surrounding lands. So they essentially did get some land, they just didn't get it all in one place. So that gives you kind of an idea how the lots fell out and as they went over. So if you want to take a look more at how these actual boundaries fall out, you can look at the details in chapters 13 to 21 and take a look at those. Also, there were some cities of refuge which were appointed, and you can learn about the cities of refuge in Exodus 21:13. I'm not going to teach about cities of refuge here, but you can learn about that if you'd like, and they did also allot those cities of refuge. So it says in Joshua 21:45 that all of the promises of God were now fulfilled. All of it was fulfilled. So Joshua sends the 3 tribes back over to the eastern side of the Jordan. Remember, it was half tribe of Manasseh and Reuben and Gad, those 40,000 warriors that were so faithful to come and help fight for those 7 years were sent home. And as they were going home, they built a monument of an altar right there on the Jordan River. There was no small controversy over this altar that they built, because it was something that they weren't sure that God would be happy about, because he was supposed to designate where the altars were built. So they had to send in the high priest, and they had a lot of discussion about this, but it came out that this was not an altar they were going to use. It was just a monument. Again, another monument to remind them of all God had done, and that they were actually a very important part of the country of Israel on the other side of the Jordan River. Now it's time for Joshua to die. He's 110 years old, and it's time for him to give his farewell address. This is similar to the one that Moses gave at the end of Deuteronomy. They're words of caution and words of remembrance. I want to encourage us to start thinking about our legacy. What can we pass down to the next generation? What are our final words? What do we want them to know about us? What do we want to help them remember and be cautious about? In just one generation, so much of the promised land that they had conquered was lost. That can happen in our lives too. God gave them an inheritance to possess, but the question was, could they keep it? Now, they were always going to be God's children. They were Israel. There are many promises that God has taken and given to them all through the Old Testament. And some of them are even coming true right now. And there are still more to come in the last days. But they have not always been able to possess the land, possess all that God wanted for them to be able to possess, the inheritance of his land. It's the same thing with us. We're saved by grace. Nothing can snatch us out of God's hand. We're always going to be his. We're not going to lose our salvation. However, we can lose our inheritance. We can fail to possess the inheritance that he has for us, which is the fullness of Christ, which is talked about in the book of Ephesians. We can lose our inheritance if we are not careful. We have to be sure that we obey his word. We follow his instructions. We fight those battles he's calling us to fight, and we do the good works that he is calling us to do. We need to let him lead us into the promised land of our faith, taking territory, not for ourselves necessarily, but going where he calls and doing what he needs done for the kingdom. So Joshua gets together the leaders first. There's 2 farewell speeches, and this is the first one. He gets them together, the elders, and these are his final words to them. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase those for you. We're going to go through those quickly. I suggest you read those in chapter 23 and 24. But the very first thing is, before I go into this, I want you to think about this question. What advice would you say to the next generation? What would you want to pass along as your final words or legacy project? So the first thing, you must take what the group learned in conquering the promised land and apply it now to your own inheritance. Drive out what is left. You will win. The second one, be courageous. 3, stay with the book. 4, hold fast to the Lord. Don't follow other gods of the culture. You're strong. God has fought ahead of you. Don't intermarry. Number 6, you will perish from the land of inheritance if you intermarry with the people of the local culture. Stern warning. You will no longer be able to stand against your enemies. Now remember that God fulfills all of his promises. But if you mess up, you're out. Then he brings all the people together again at Shechem. Remember where they had that monument there with the stones and all of the words were written on the stones, and they built an altar of uncut stones, and they were facing Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim and did the blessings and cursings. They take all Israel back there again for Joshua's final words to the entire people of Israel. Again, this is like a natural amphitheater, so everybody could hear there. So this is what he wanted them to do. First of all, remember all the things that God has done among you. Remember, keep track of them. Go over them in your mind. Remember all that he did with Abraham and Jacob and Egypt, and how he sent Moses and Aaron to deliver you from Egypt and parted the Red Sea, and you went to the holy mountain and you got the 10 commandments. Then you walked in the wilderness and you came up the east side of the Jordan and you conquered Balak, it says in Numbers 22, and the 2 Amorite kings on the east side of the Jordan, Sihon and Og. Then you went over the Jordan River and you conquered Jericho, and we had many campaigns in the promised land. So he's just telling them, remember everything that happened. Remember, I'm giving you a land for which you did not labor. You didn't build those houses. You didn't you didn't clear those fields. You didn't dig those wells. Remember that. And put away the false gods that you brought from Egypt, from the other side of the river. Get rid of them now, because you have decided to take a move out of self and into God's army. We're seeing Jesus now comes from our suffering servant and our shepherd. He also becomes the commander of the Lord's host, and we go behind him as the commander of the Lord's army. So Joshua finally concludes with these words in 24:15. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So what he's saying to the people is, okay, it's your generation now. It's your turn. Make up your mind. Make up your own covenant. Choose, just like Elijah said. How long will you waver between 2 opinions? Choose, who are you going to serve? So he sets up another stone as a memorial, as a remembrance, again, another place for them to help them remember all that had been done. But each generation must make their own choice and make their own monuments. Now, he was 110 years old at this time, And the rest of the chapter records the death of Joshua. So let me give you a charge. Continue to remember the battles that have been won in your own Christian faith. Find a way to pass down those treasured memories to the next generation. Have your own monument like this cross you see here in the picture that we have down on our river. Put up some stones. Write some stories in a book. Record them on a voice recorder. Or maybe get a special Bible and highlight all your favorite verses. Do something to pass along to the next generation. Write out a parting speech and put it with your will, because you may not have time to write one. We don't know what's going to happen to us. So I encourage you, get creative with your legacy project and take this seriously, because if there's anything I learned from this Bible study is that my number one thing God wants me to do is make sure I pass along my faith to the next generation, to my children and to my grandchildren. In fact, this actual Bible study is part of my legacy project, so that I can look at my grandson Jonathan, and think about him saying, when I die, Grandma, she loved Jesus. She loved him during her life, and she'll love him all her days. Thank you for studying Josh with me. I hope these lessons have challenged you to move out in your faith and do a new thing. Let's not get complacent. We must work until Jesus returns to this earth, fight those battles, and do those works that he has set out for us to do, and live in the land and enjoy all the inheritance and all the promises, all the fullness of Christ. Here's one more thing. Here's a picture of our mama chickadee and her hatched babies. Oh yes, God is doing a new thing. This is a symbol of our resolve. Let's go conquer the promised land.